What's going on, everybody? I'm Jerry. Merry Christmas. Hope you had a great holiday season. And today's my Week 17 power rankings. We're going to go over all 32 teams, where they rank from 32 to 1, as we do every week. A lot of changing this week. There was a big group that I wasn't really sure what to do with. I know we've learned a lot this season, but with the amount of quarterback injuries and everything that's been going on, it's been kind of difficult to rank some of these teams, especially, how do you rank them knowing their quarterback's out? So we'll talk about it in just a second here. But before we do that, like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you're thinking of these videos, anything that I should do differently, or anything else that you'd like to see. We've really just been doing the takeaways, power rankings, and picks. So if you have any other suggestions, leave a comment down below. And let's get right into it, starting off with the team that's owned the 32 spot, the Carolina Panthers. All season they've owned it. They're 2-13. They still have the last pick, or the last spot and the first pick in the draft, although the Bears have it. So sucks for them, being the worst team in the league and having a quarterback that they drafted first overall. So they got to get him some help. There's not really much of an offensive line, and Adam Thielen is your number one wide receiver, so they're going to need some help over there. Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard aren't cutting it. They stay at 32. Not much to talk about over there. Commanders, I have move all the way back to 31, though. Might be a bit of an overreaction, but if you look, they are 4-11. They currently have the third pick. They're in the race right behind the Cardinals at this point, for one of the worst teams. And just especially with them benching Sam Howell, who I do have pictured next to me here, who isn't going to be playing, it sounds like. I think it's too early. I think Sam Howell wasn't that bad, but I think they're going to look significantly worse without Sam Howell. So I don't know what the Commanders are going to do. I feel like developing him would be better than anything. They still do have Eric Bieniemy, who I'm sure is going to be looking for a head coaching job. But I don't understand the benching of Sam Howell. And for me, he was one of the brightest spots of the team. So I know he's been making some mistakes, but he's a rookie. So I don't understand the point of that. But they moved 3 spots back to 31 at 4-11. Jets moved back a spot. Sure, they got a win over the Commanders, so they should be ahead of them. Yes, they are 6-9. This is mainly because of the issues at quarterback. You don't have a good quarterback. Don't have any way to get the ball to the weapons. Breece Hall is usually most of the offense, aside from a game or two. And then the only other, the upside all season was their defense, but then they let the Commanders put up like 28 or whatever it was this week. So they do move back a spot in a win, beating one of the worst teams, but barely. And the brightest spot of their team, the defense, not looking very good. So I have the Jets moving back 1 spot despite a win to 30. Giants also moved back 2 spots. Close game, so it was tougher to move them back, especially, keeping it close against the Eagles. But with them not knowing what they're going to do at quarterback either, just makes it tough. You still see that minus 157 point differential. So you got to continue to factor that in. And 29th seems right for me with where they're at. Could move a couple of these teams around, but I have them move back 2 spots to 29. The Patriots, this is where it's kind of questionable. Obviously, the last 2 teams we just talked about do have a better record than the Patriots, but I thought the Patriots win over the Broncos was pretty impressive, and it got them to bench Russell Wilson for the rest of the season. So Bill Belichick is now the Russell Wilson killer, I guess. But yeah, the offense has still been completely inept. I think it looks a little better with Zappy than it did with Mac Jones. I think they missed out losing Malik Cunningham. I would have liked, especially with how the season went, I would have liked to see him. Maybe that's just not Bill Belichick's style. I'm not sure. Did have Cam Newton. I guess that didn't work out either, so maybe that's part of it. They're 4-11. I do have them moving up, though, because they actually looked like they were able to produce offense, and the defense kind of played how you would a little bit closer to how you would expect a Bill Belichick defense to play. So I moved the Patriots up 3 spots to 28. This one's really questionable as well, keeping the Chargers ahead of the Patriots in a loss to the Bills. I just felt like with how close they stayed in it with the Bills, despite not having Keenan Allen, who is pictured to the side there, I thought that they played really well, and I didn't think it was worth it to move them behind the Patriots yet, especially moving the Patriots up 4 spots. I just didn't think they were deserving of it, especially with how much of a mess the Broncos kind of were last week. So I move both of them together up the 3 spots to 27 and 28. Cardinals could have moved back farther. I just thought, they kept in it against within a touchdown for a lot of the second half against the Bears, who I think the Bears are actually better than their record is. And I think the Cardinals, you could have them lower, but I just think because Kyler Murray is still not a bad quarterback, you look at all the teams below that I've listed, and they just don't have. It seems like they don't even know who their quarterback's going to be for the most part. So with the Cardinals having that going for them, James Conner still looks good on the ground. Their defense really needs a lot of help, but I didn't move them back too far. I think the Cardinals definitely could keep moving back, but the last 4 to 5 spots have kind of been reserved for those teams that just can't produce offense and just look like an absolute mess. And I don't think the Cardinals have been that. So I moved them back only 1 spot to 26, despite being 3-12. Tennessee Titans, I have moving back 1 spot to 25. That just felt right for me. You lose a close game, and it sounds like Vrabel's going to be gone. People are saying it's Derrick Henry's last year there, so that's going to be a tough situation. But I have them moving back just the 1 spot to 25. Meanwhile, the Raiders move up, getting a big win over the Chiefs, finishing the game kind of how they started the first game against the Chiefs. If you remember in the first game, they go up 14-0 and then just let the Chiefs run away with it. I believe it was 27-17 was the final score of that game. And this one, the Raiders hold out and play a good game all around and get the victory. Lowest 7-8 team that I have rated, and it's mainly just because it's still Aiden O'Connell. It's still Antonio Pierce, and I don't like to project out, but I think I guess you can't really go to next year, but with how the team has been, I don't trust it, so it makes it more difficult for me to move them up. Kind of like what happened, I needed to earn that trust from Jake Browning with the Bengals, and they ended up moving their way back up. But Raiders move up 2 spots for me in a big win over the Chiefs, and moving to 7-8, as well as the Falcons, who also, they get a big win over the Colts. You'll see in these next couple teams here, I just wasn't really sure who to jump the Falcons ahead of, and I didn't really feel comfortable moving them ahead because they're another team that doesn't know who their quarterback's going to be. They kind of rely on having, some good wide receiver targets. They have a great running back room, maybe one of the best in the league, and they played good defense early on in the year, and they did show a little bit more of that, especially against a Colts team that had been playing well all season. But I couldn't move them up yet, so they stay at 23 despite moving up to 7-8. Don't move ahead of the Bears, another team where they just beat the Cardinals, who, again, I'm clearly higher on the Cardinals than some other people are. But if you look at these next teams coming up, they either beat bad teams by not as much as they should have, or lost to pretty decent teams. So it made it very difficult for me to move any of them around. The Bears barely beat the Cardinals, so I couldn't move them up ahead of this next team at 21, the Packers. So I couldn't move them ahead of them. So the Bears, to me, had to stay at 22. I didn't feel comfortable, moving the Raiders up anymore. Probably could have. Couldn't move the Falcons up ahead of the Bears. And then the Packers is kind of the same thing. They get a win, but it was over the Panthers. I was actually tempted to move the Bears ahead of the Packers, but I can't confidently do that yet. So the Packers end up at 21, not moving. Same with the Steelers. Like, the Steelers did have a really bad loss, and it looked rough, but I couldn't move them. I still think the Steelers are a better football team than the Packers and the Bears. So I couldn't move them back. They stay where they're at, despite usually having a good defense and that not really happening. And then the Vikings, too. The Vikings barely lose to the Lions, who have been good, but Lions were also on like a bit of a slow streak there. So the Vikings stay where they're at 19 at 7-8. So that's kind of our little streak there of people that aren't moving. I still don't think the Vikings are horrible, but they're another one where they probably don't even know what they're doing at quarterback this year. They actually just announced that Jaron Hall is going to be the quarterback this week. So I'm interested to see how he does, because it seems like a no-brainer. He probably should have stayed in when Nick Mullins came in. It should have just been Jaron Hall. He's your youngest quarterback. You're not making a playoff run with Nick Mullins, so I don't know why they did that. But Jaron Hall, I think, is the move. Vikings stay put at 19. Then we start to have some movers coming up here. The Saints move back a spot. Lose a game, you move back a spot. There's a couple teams coming up here that lost. It was just an average game to me, but they barely lost, so it made sense. Other team gets a big win, they move up. So the Saints, 7-8, still have a plus 34 point differential, which is good. And you look at all their points per game, yards per game, that's all accurate. That's where they're at. It's just they've had some bad losses, and that kind of hurts statistically. And then, the point differential's high because they've also had some big wins. So the Saints move back just the one spot to 18 with the Broncos, who get a bad loss over the Patriots. Was tempted to move them back farther because of Russ. But I'm interested to see what happens, because I think the Broncos, maybe whoever the backup is that comes in, maybe he can do something good with the team. So I couldn't move him back any farther than this. I kept him at 17 because I was surprised what Sean Payton was able to get done with how horrible the team looked early on. People, I think, might even be forgetting that the Broncos lost 70-20 against the Dolphins. So, but I just moved him back to one spot. Broncos definitely could move back if the quarterback doesn't look good moving forward. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I'm a big hater on. A big hater on Baker Mayfield. I don't really have any good reasoning. I've just never really liked Baker Mayfield. I don't think he's very good. And the Buccaneers, you see Rachaad White starting to finally, become more of an all-around back and getting better on the ground, continuing to do well in the pass game. So good to see that from him. You still have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Kate Otten, I think, is a pretty good tight end. Vita Vea has been injured, so obviously that hurts. But he's, been playing a little bit more, and they are leading the division. So more the reason for them to move up and be 16, top half of the NFL. I feel like, they're going to be 1 through 4 seed, probably the 4 seed in the playoffs. So deserving of 16 for me, and I'm fine with it. I'm not a fan. Buccaneers aren't doing anything in the playoffs. I think we can rule them out on that. Colts move back one spot, a bad loss. Where offense isn't producing. Normally that's kind of been their strong point, and their offense has been able to produce. Their defense just kind of plays well enough, and they continue to win games with Gardner Minshew. Obviously, it sucks still not having Anthony Richardson in, but with a bad loss this week, they moved back a spot. I couldn't move them back, past the Buccaneers. I didn't think that was really fair, so they stick at 15, or move back a spot to 15, as well as the Bengals have a bad loss in this week, and finally starting to look better. You have Jake Browning kind of going off. I still think Jake Browning can do a good job, and if they're in the playoffs, I think they could possibly win a playoff game with Jake Browning. I really like what I've seen from him. I don't want to believe yet that the tape has been found on him, and that's why he wasn't able to have as much success in this past week. But I move up the Bengals, move back the Bengals, just the one spot, still a minus 27 point differential. Again, that's from the few bad weeks early on. Bengals just statistically do not do very well early on in the season, and that's kind of what's hurting them this year. Because if they just would have played, not last week, but if they would have played, the weeks prior when they were winning games noticeably and getting big wins over teams you wouldn't expect, I think they very well could be 10-5 right now. I think they could definitely have 2 more wins. So Bengals move back just the one spot to 14. Feel like that's still right. They're still 8-7. And the Seahawks had to jump those 2 spots to 13 for me. Drew Lock, it's a big game-winning drive. How exciting was that? It was a fun game to watch. Seahawks have been a good football team. They've been doing better. So love to see it. 8-7, Seahawks win. Moving to 13, just the 2 spots. I think the fact that Geno Smith, I don't know, it wasn't working as well with Geno Smith. So it sounds like they're going back to him, but I also don't know if he was the problem. So I like the Seahawks though. I'm interested to see what they do moving forward. They get a big win. They had to move up for me to 13 in this case at 8-7. The Texans stay where they're at. Sure, they did lose, and it wasn't a great game. I don't want to overreact to it. You had so many backups in, and the injuries, it's not been great. So I just have them staying where they're at. I didn't think that they were I can't say that they're worse than the Seahawks yet, especially recency bias with all the problems the Seahawks were having and their losing streak. And then with the next team ahead, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who very well could move back past, especially with Trevor Lawrence. Basically every week he just says that he's injured all week and doesn't practice, and then 15 minutes before the game starts, they go, oh yeah, Trevor Lawrence is going to play, and he's going to play like shit. So that's basically what's been happening to the Jaguars these past 2 to 3 weeks, and it just seems like that's going to keep happening. Early on, and even in the past 2 or 3 years, the Jaguars defense has played really well. And then you've got Trevor Lawrence, you've got Calvin Ridley now, you've got, Christian Kirk's been injured, but Zay Jones, so many weapons. Evan Ingram's had a great season. Travis Etienne was doing great. Now he's kind of fallen off. I don't know what's going on with the Jaguars, but they're not doing good, and they're losing games that they shouldn't. They play the Panthers. This is definitely a big get-right game for them, because if they lose to the Panthers, they might drop out of the top 16 for me. That would just be horrible. I don't see that happening, and you'll see my thoughts in the picks video coming up here soon. But Jaguars, I have at 11, just moved back to one spot at 8-7. Excuse me. Next, we have the Rams moving up a spot. They get a win. They move up a spot. That's really, really the biggest on that. They beat the Saints, who I think the Saints are pretty good. Again, we talked before. I was high on the Saints going into the season. I was pretty confident that they'd have 10, 11 wins. It's not possible anymore. Even though they've had their struggles with how well the Rams have been playing recently, I love to see it. I think between Matt Stafford, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, and Kyron Williams, the emergence of Kyron Williams has been absolutely huge for this Rams team, where their offense is pretty much guaranteed to put up points, and if their defense can just play well enough, they're probably going to get the win. So I think the Rams, I actually said this a few weeks ago, while they were still losing, I thought the Rams are the sneaky team, for a playoff run, where if anybody's going to do the Giants, make it through the playoffs and play against the Ravens in the Super Bowl, assuming that I think the Ravens are going to go to the Super Bowl. I don't know if the Rams are going to win, but I feel like the Rams are the team that of the whole NFL that would be capable of pulling off something like that. So I moved the Rams up into the top 10 at 8-7, just the one spot there. Kansas City Chiefs, forgot to put them moving back. They did move back 3 spots. Don't see the arrow. I guess that didn't make it into the video, but they did move back 3 whole spots. Rough week for the Chiefs, especially losing to the Raiders. You aren't going to move up with the Raiders. I had the Chiefs at 6. They had to jump back behind a couple of these teams. The offense has been an absolute problem. Kelsey's not been able to get the ball. I think Taylor Swift might be a part of the problem. And then they pretty much guard him because nobody else on the offense can catch the ball. And Mahomes can make some good plays, but that seems like that's been about it recently. He'll make a couple good plays. He'll get the ball in position for a receiver to make a play, and they just drop it, or he complains about the refs or whatever. That's basically all the Chiefs have done. Their defense, though, 2nd in points per game, 2nd in yards per game. Very impressive of their defense. I think underrated in their whole Super Bowl run. Their defense hasn't always been like this, but I think in their dynasty that people talk about, I think it is not talked about enough that the Chiefs have had a pretty good defense. And I think this year it's been exceptional, especially, like I said, points per game and yards per game on defense. They're ranked 2nd in the entire NFL with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce on offense. So would be nice to see him just get one wide receiver. Be interested to see what happens in the offseason. I would assume they might clean house. I would assume they're at least going to get rid of a couple of the receivers with all the problems they've been having. But the Chiefs, I have moved back to 9 from 6. Yes, they did move back 3 spots. Didn't put the arrow in there. Detroit Lions, number 8. I have them moving up a spot. They get a win over the Vikings. I don't think it was convincing enough of a win. And the Lions have had a lot of problems recently. The Chiefs have just had more problems. That's why the Chiefs moved back behind them. You could say this is low for the Lions. We'll talk about this at the end when we can look at all the teams side by side. But I have the Lions at 8, moving up just the one spot at 11-4. Philadelphia Eagles, I have staying where they're at 7. I was thinking about moving them up. They barely beat the Giants, though. It was too close of a game for me. And I said that they really have to blow these teams out of the water in these last 3 games. They have the Giants, they have the Cardinals coming up this weekend, and then they play the Giants again the following week. And if they don't have any blowout victories, they're going to stick around this 7, 8, 9, 10 region. And even if they get 2 more blowout victories against the Cardinals and the Giants, I still don't know if they make it back into the top 5 with how strong that top 5 is. Maybe they pass the Bills up, if they're in my top 5. But I have the Eagles sticking where they're at 7. And the Browns. Joe Flacco is that guy. He is awesome. I love the fact that Joe Flacco is just slinging it in 2023 and now soon 2024. That is just amazing because the Browns seemed like they had, so many pieces. They have Deshaun Watson. They have Nick Chubb. They have Myles Garrett. and at some point, all of them get injured, and Joe Flacco just comes in and is making all the plays. Amari Cooper goes for like 250 or whatever it was on my bench in fantasy, by the way. That was great. Still won, but didn't like to see him on the bench on my fantasy team. Also had George Pickens on my bench in another league. Everybody knows he put up like 34, and Amari Cooper put up like 52. So, but the Browns, enough about my fantasy. The Browns, phenomenal. I love the Browns. I am very high on the Browns, and I am excited to see what happens moving forward. And I hope Joe Flacco just plays the rest of the season. I hope Browns win the Super Bowl. I'll say it. I love Myles Garrett. Big Myles Garrett fan. I kind of like Amari Cooper. Obviously not happy about him being on my bench and not producing this year. But I am an Amari Cooper fan. I think he's kind of underrated at receiver. I like David Njoku. Plays with all the heart in the world and just runs people over and cannot be stopped. I think I said Myles Garrett already. Just the whole story with Joe Flacco coming in. It's just too great. So Browns move up 2 spots to 6 at 10-5. I think they're going to be a juggernaut in the playoffs. Buffalo Bills, I keep them where they're at. Again, they needed to beat the Chargers by a little better to move anywhere for me. I don't think the Browns could move past them yet with their win over the Texans. It was a convincing win, and the offense just showed out, but couldn't move the Browns that far. Bills didn't lose; they still won against the Chargers. Some would say with some of the calls at the end could have lost that game, so it would be a reason to move them back. I just don't want to overreact to that. I think the Buffalo Bills are capable of being a top 5 team, but I think the Browns are like, if the Bills are 5A, I think the Browns are 5B. I think it's very close. But I get the Bills at 5, and the Cowboys move back a spot. This one was real easy. Last week I had the Cowboys at 3, Dolphins at 4. They just flip-flop because the Dolphins win, Cowboys lose. It was a close game. This is another one that could have went the other way. You're going to have to win those games in the playoffs. And this right here, especially if the Eagles do win the division, the Cowboys are going to have to play against a good team in the playoffs. And I think they could lose. They still haven't really beat any good teams other than the Eagles. So Cowboys, you lose a game, you move back. Especially, it is the Dolphins, but the Dolphins were right behind you. So now the Dolphins move up to the number 3 spot. Sorry about that, some technical difficulties. Dolphins move up to number 3. Their offense still is great. I think their offense has actually fallen off just a little bit. I don't think their offense is as explosive as it was, and I think some people are figuring out Mike McDaniels a little bit, but their defense has showed up, and their defense has been significantly better than I've given them credit for. So Dolphins it's very fair to be the 3rd team. I think they're better and more consistent and have beat better teams than the Cowboys. I think they're fairly comparable, though, as far as I think the Dolphins in the AFC are very similar to the Cowboys of the NFC, just with how they've played, how, early on, maybe a little bit in opposite ways. As the Dolphins early on, their offense was like, who's going to stop it? There's no way to stop it. And the Cowboys defense was like, they're going to force a bunch of turnovers and score touchdowns on defense, and their offense is just going to play well enough. And meanwhile, it's kind of flip-flopping, where now the Cowboys offense is actually kind of showing out and being the driving force to win the game, and the defense is actually falling off a little bit, whereas the Dolphins, their defense is playing a lot better, and their offense seems like it's getting figured out a bunch. But the Miami Dolphins move up 1 spot to 3 at 11-4, still leading the charge on offense. San Francisco 49ers, you have a bad loss to the Ravens like they did in what I called the Super Bowl preview. And when you have those teams up there like that, they're more than worthy of getting moved back. I still think the 49ers are the juggernaut of the NFC, but this showed that if this is the Super Bowl preview, the 49ers are going to have to get their shit together. Brock Purdy's going to have to figure out how to not throw a bunch of interceptions and play like the Brock Purdy of earlier in this season and last season. So interesting to see, especially because I had pretty much all year had the 49ers ahead of the Ravens. So big game for the Ravens, who, being the last team, are very clearly at number 1. They're 12-3. They have the best record in the league. They have the second best point differential. They have the lowest points per game on defense and are up there in their offensive stats. As far as being an all-around team, they have been the team right next to the 49ers. Both teams have had some bad losses that they probably shouldn't have had, but they're the juggernaut of their respective conferences. So when the Ravens win and the 49ers are currently on top and they win over the 49ers, obviously they move up to number one, and that's where they belong. Ravens are the best team in the league right now, especially beating the 49ers, who were the biggest argument for any other team. And that moves on to the end here. We can go over all the spots I talked about. I wanted to talk about the span between the Falcons and the Vikings, where I didn't move anybody. I think you could probably move. You might be able to move the Steelers back, like behind the Packers potentially. And I don't know. Maybe you would move the Falcons ahead of the Bears, but I don't think that's really fair to say either. The Eagles, I think the Eagles and the Lions you could flip. I think you could say that the Lions have been better, especially because the Lions have got some more convincing wins and less bad losses. Obviously, they have the one to the Ravens. Ravens are the best in the league, though, right now. So that's really the only thing you can say there. I think the Seahawks you could potentially put ahead of the Texans. But I like where all my spots are at. I think the back end gets cloudy, especially with having the Chargers and the Patriots where I have them. I don't know if the Patriots maybe should be ahead, and I don't know if it's worth with how bad their records are. Same with the Cardinals. Cardinals are still 3-12, but I have them in at 26th. I just think the quarterback issues. Look at the back four teams. Giants don't know who their quarterback is. The Jets don't, mainly because Aaron Rodgers is injured. The Commanders don't. The Panthers are just the worst team. Obviously, they know who their quarterback is, but they haven't done anything to help them. And then the Patriots, you got Zappy, but doesn't sound like they're going to go with him moving forward to next year. And then the Chargers, kind of the same situation where they know who their quarterback is next year. Same situation to the Jets, where they know who the quarterback is next year. People have been talking, though. People have been saying that Herbert could be out. I think it's possible. I think it's kind of a stretch. I don't know why they would do it. I've heard they want to get out of the contract. I don't understand it at all. But let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any spots that I should switch. Am I high on anybody anywhere? Am I too low on anybody? So comment down below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.